Good evening and welcome to this Q&A on plant-based nutrition. I'm Dr. Anthony Hadge. I'm based in Melbourne, and I hope that this provides for you a little bit of information around nutrition and its power, not only its impact on your health, but the impact on the environment, the economical impacts, and of course the social impacts. So this will be a forum where I want to give you a bit of an overview for the first 5 to 10 minutes about what I do and what I promote, and then also answer any of your questions that come up about healthcare and particularly about nutrition. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information which is also, for want of a better word, misinformation. And it is important that people recognize this and do something about it. The best way to source the correct information is to always make sure it's scientific and it's research-based. So one of the key things that I try and promote in my work is the idea that nutrition can be used as one of the most powerful tools to rejuvenate and revitalize your health. The problem we have these days in the current healthcare system in the Western world are the debilitating effects of obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and arthritic conditions, usually through poor exercise and lack of activity. Those key conditions have such a drain on the healthcare system. They have a drain on the healthcare system in the public sense, in terms of its drain into the public hospital, but also on the community. A lot of manpower hours are lost because people are unwell and sick. And this has got really nothing to do, so to speak, with genetics, okay? It doesn't really matter that your genes say one thing. If we think back to 1970, one of the best stats I think about is that in China, in 1970, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes was around about 1%. That meant that if you took, on average, 100 people, you'd find one person would have type 2 diabetes. Since 1970, up until about 2000, that skyrocketed to about 12%, and it's growing and growing and growing. This is because the middle class has now expanded. They've been able to afford more dietary foods which are rich in processed products. And so that middle class, that income has then therefore predisposed them to getting the chronic health conditions that we see. This isn't genetics. The genome didn't suddenly change in 20, 30 years that quickly. What actually happened is that the intake of food became so energy dense that the body stored it. So why do we have these conditions? Why are they existing? They're existing because the body is designed to look after you. It's designed to care for you. And the best way it can do that is store every single good thing you give it. And the macronutrients, particularly fat, okay, there are 3 macronutrients. They are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. We use fat in all our cells. Fat's a very, very important building block in the cell wall, and particularly also as an energy source. However, the body holds on to that. It's like gold bullion. If you go to my website, livinglongertoday.com, what you will find is that I have a PDF there where I explain this, but fat is like gold bullion bar. It can be quite small, but it's worth a fortune, and the body stores it. So that fat is generally saturated fat, and it's only found in animal products. So when the body stores the saturated fat, it's energy dense. It stores it in the organs. It stores it in the skin. It stores it wherever it can, but we don't really use that energy. The energy that we use day to day in all our functions of our cell are carbohydrates, the other macronutrient. And this usually comes in the form of the simple sugars. And the simple sugars are like the sugar you find on your table, and fructose, which is the sugar we get from fruit, and so forth. Now, we like to, our bodies generally can break down the sugar that we have when it's in long chains and it's together, and the body will chop it down slowly, and therefore the impact on our body is slow. But what actually happens is that when we have the free sugars, the very simple sugars that are already chopped up and diced up in the processing arena. When they're popped into the food, they very, very quickly get absorbed into the body. They escalate the blood sugar level. The insulin surges, that pushes the sugar into the cells. So our whole way of the body is used to dealing with food from a evolutionary perspective has been completely overshadowed by this high energy content. So one key thing is that I like to give the analogy that every single one of your cells is like a room. And if you think about the room that you're in right now, the room has a function. The room generally has a door where things can get out and get in. The room might have electronic equipment that has a certain function. Every single item in the room should play a certain role, just like your cell. Your cell has mitochondria where they produce energy. Your cell has storage vesicles and so forth, and of course has a nucleus where all the blueprints of how to create it are stored. Now, when we cloud that cell, just like when you clutter your room with rubbish and junk, the room becomes difficult to access, and the room also becomes a little bit harder to navigate and to work around. Your cells are no different. Over time, when you have these high energy, poor foods, especially in the form of free fatty acids, which come from animal products, they get stored into the cells. Particularly think of it like the muscle cells. Now, when they get stored in the muscle cells, it's just like emptying rubbish into the bedroom. And when you empty rubbish into a room, it becomes cluttered. The room doesn't function properly. And it's the same thing here. Your cells don't function properly. And therefore, over time, the efficiency of the cell fails. When the door is generally opened and we want the sugar to come in, if that doorway is blocked, if that door isn't functioning properly, that's what usually is the start of something called diabetes. And when we have too much sugar that remains outside the bedroom, too much sugar that remains in the blood, it can therefore make the cells very sticky, the red blood cells, and it can cause an inflammatory kind of flavor within the body. And this can lead to things such as cardiovascular disease, which has major impacts on the small vessels, particularly in the brain, in the heart, and the kidneys, and of course what we call in the periphery, that is the edge of our body, such as the fingers and the toes. These disease processes all have one clear etiology. It's in these poor foods that we eat. So one of the key things that I try and get people to realize is that it's never ever too late. I've had some remarkable wins over the past 3 or 4 years that I've been doing this, seeing many, many patients who've come in, sometimes in their 70s and 80s, on a multitude of medication for their blood pressure, for their cholesterol, even for their obesity. And I pop them onto a plant-based diet and they remarkably get better. And it's no surprise why they wouldn't get better. I gave the analogy the other day to a podcast that I did for Corrine, and Corrine is live with us now. And I explained that when we were all 8 years old, when we were younger, and we'd fall over and we'd graze our knee, what would actually happen is that within a couple of days, you'd heal. And if you remember, you'd be all grazed and bloodied, but then you'd heal really quickly because there were blueprints in every single one of those cells that said, this is how you repair, this is what you do, this is how you rebuild an injured cell. The body has a really beautiful, beautiful, attractive capacity to heal. So when we start to incorporate more healthy foods into our diet, and I'll come to that in a couple of seconds, but when we start to incorporate more healthy foods into our diet, what actually happens is that the body then starts to heal. The body starts to clean up the clutter that was in that room. If instead of 3 times a day, the door isn't opened and rubbish isn't poured in, then eventually the room will get cleared. Now, it may not be cleared overnight, it may not be cleared within a month, but it will become clearer and cleaner and cleaner. And to that end, if you just think about what happens when we all clean our bedrooms, is that it's a lot easier to get around, things are found, things start to work better. So your cell is no different. As your cell starts to clean up and your cell starts to repair all these inflammatory kind of aspects of your health, then your body starts to do really, really well. And of course, your body will repair. And this is why patients who are overweight start to shed the kilos. Their blood pressure comes down, so their medication dependency is lessened. Can I just ask a very quick question to those who are live? I hope I'm coming in clear and it's not scattered, because I'm trying to be as close as I can to my Wi-Fi. Could someone very kindly just say whether it's coming in clear or not? And I'm hoping that it is. Hopefully it's all coming in clear for you. So getting back to what I was just saying then, your body will start to clear up. Now, that makes sense to me. That makes sense. Just when you were 8 years old and, and you would repair, so much so you can do it when you're 80 years old. It's never, ever too late. These anecdotes that we hear from people who follow a plant-based diet, they're nothing remarkable in the sense that they're nothing magical or they're completely consistent with what the science says. The science says once you tend to turn off the inflammatory foods that are doing damage to your body will repair. So a couple of wins that I've had in the past 3 or 4 years were an 80-year-old patient, a gentleman who was a type 2 diabetic on high blood pressure tablets and high cholesterol tablets. He came in, and over the next 3 or 4 months, he lost a staggering 35 kilos. I had to take him off all his tablets because he was just doing so well. And there was an interesting case of when he was still taking a blood pressure tablet that was lowering his blood pressure. Wasn't normalizing it, it just lowers the pressure. But he had normalized his blood pressure because of his diet. And what was happening is that he was still taking the medication. So by taking the medication, he was actually pushing his blood pressure down even further. And he had a little collapse one day. And then we realized, well, we've got to take him off his blood pressure tablet because he's doing so well. So people get better. It's never, ever too late. The simple mechanism of this is, so insofar as the nutrition, is that we're providing our body with what it wants. Your body really thrives on one thing, carbohydrates, okay? Carbohydrates have been very, very, very unfairly demonized in the past. The carbohydrates that our body loves are usually the whole food-based carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates. These are the sugars that are in a long chain. And when we get them absorbed into our body, they get broken down very, very slowly, and everyone gets happy. I want you to, for a second, if you can, think back to when you may have had a really, really fatty meal, say like a pizza, for example, and you had this pizza and it filled you up really quickly. And then about half an hour to an hour late, you're hungry again. Why are you hungry? You've just had a huge pizza. What's happened? What's happened is that the body the stomach has first of all stretched. And so it has sent a neurohormonal message back to the brain via the nerves and hormones saying, hey, listen, the stomach's really full, so we think we're going to be okay here. We don't think we need any more food, so it makes you feel full. But what happened is that when it broke down everything that was in that meal, it absorbed all the fat, it stored all the fat, didn't use it, it stored all the fat. The amount of simple sugars that were in that meal were actually very few. So when they got absorbed, and remember, they have to fuel every single cell in your body. They've got to do it 24 hours a day. After a very short time, the little cell in your foot suddenly said, well, hang on, I haven't got any sugar coming my way. What's happened here? And of course, the hunger hormones get released again, and we become more and more hungry. And we then go and seek more and more and more food. But as we're doing that, we're also consuming more and more high fatty foods, very energy-rich foods, and body will store that. When you change over to a whole foods plant-based diet, what you end up with is an appropriate calorie load coming in, insofar as you can eat as much food as you can, as much food as you want, because not only will that food be rich in fiber, be rich in micronutrients like vitamins and antioxidants, but also have the complex carbohydrates that will feed your body and make it sufficiently happy so that you won't feel hungry. When I say to some of my patients, I'd like you to consume as much potato as you like, as much mashed potato as you want, they get a little bit scared because they think, well, I've got this huge big bowl of mashed potato. Is it going to make me really sick? And is it going to be too much for my body? Is it going to turn to fat? No, it doesn't. It's more, you eat as much food as you want. You eat as much food until you are happy. And the majority of the whole foods that you eat are going to contain massive amounts of water, massive amounts of fiber. They fill you up, your bowels start to work better, and everyone's happy. Some of the side effects that I've seen in my patients who go on this diet, they're pretty remarkable side effects, and I have to warn you what they are. The first thing is you don't sweat as much. You sleep better. You feel better. Your tummy works a lot better. You go to the bathroom and everything feels fantastic. Almost every second patient that comes in and sees me, and I'll ask them about their bowels, because that's what doctors do. We get obsessed about bowels, is that they complain about them. And they say, well, actually, whilst you're asking me that, I do have issues. And when they start to eat really well, not only do they start to notice that their joints don't sort of seem to hurt as much, they have a bit more energy, but their abdomen and their bowel works really, really well. Skin becomes softer. I know that when I first went vegan and I first started consuming a whole foods plant-based diet, I lost a lot of weight quite quickly, but my skin noticeably was a lot smoother, and I just felt so much better. I had a lot more energy, and I slept really, really well. So the benefits that we see are clinically evident from the first couple of days onward. But it doesn't stop there. It can go out for months and months, and as I talked about before, people will end up coming off their medications. Okay, so I don't want to dwell too much, if I can avoid it, on the rigmarole of how this all works, because my website has that, and I've explained that hopefully quite clearly in my PDF. You can get it from my website. It's all free. I'll never charge a cent for any of this stuff. And it's there for people to embrace. I only ask that you watch the danger foods. The danger foods being the animal products, okay, particularly dairy. Dairy is evil. Dairy is toxic. Dairy is the worst thing that you could ever be putting into your body. Dairy is designed, okay, when we think of dairy, we're thinking of cow's milk, really. Cow's milk is designed for one thing. As Michael Clapper beautifully says, it is designed to take a little baby calf and grow it over the period of a couple of months into a mammoth big 200-kilogram cow. So within that product of milk, cow's milk, you will find hormones, fats, growth factors, all these nutrients that are washing over that baby calf's body, through the baby calf's cells, telling it, grow, 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 grow. The other thing it does is it goes through all the hormonal sensitive cells, the organs where the hormones are used to communicate, that being the breast, the ovary, and the prostate of note. And it tells them, grow, grow, grow. We don't want those cells to be growing. We don't want breast tissue to be growing. We don't want the prostate to be told to grow. We don't want the ovaries to be told to grow. We don't want these hormonal signals from an outside source washing over our bodies, washing through those cells and those organs and telling those organs to grow. The urologists, when they see their patients, they're specialists who deal with male anatomy, or male and female anatomy. Now, when they will go the urological system, they will often tell their patients who've had prostate cancer, don't have dairy. Don't have dairy because it contains growth factors in it that will tell your prostate to grow. We don't want that. We don't want any of our patients to be consuming these foods. They are not designed for us. They are extremely dangerous. We hear the idea about calcium. Well, where do you think the cow gets its calcium from? The cow gets its calcium from the ground. That's where the metals are. The metals are in the earth. They then get absorbed with the water into the ground-based starch molecules or plants like potatoes, corn, pumpkin, all the plant foods. The calcium gets enriched and then we consume the plants. We don't have to use the animals as a conduit. And there's this aspect that what will happen is that as the animal then eats the plants and consumes the calcium, and then another animal eats that, another animal eats that, there's this biomagnification, and we end up getting the micronutrient that we want, But we also, in the process, get a lot of toxins and other things added in, and we don't want that. Fish, another example. We consume fish for omega-3, but we get a whole heap of fat. We get a lot of cholesterol, and we get a lot of mercury. There's a lot of mercury in the ocean today because of all the shipping and boats and the waste that goes into the ocean. That's the fish's home. They swim through that. They are like sponges. They absorb that. And when you might have a fish who consumes a small amount of algae and it goes up the biomagnification just to get the omega-3, we should be getting it from the same place that the fish get it, and that's from the plants, from the seaweed, okay? You don't need this. I don't see any calcium deficiency. I don't see any protein deficiency. I don't see anything like that in patients who follow this way of eating. These products are designed to, I suppose, feed an industry, the agricultural industry, that really is manipulating what is really natural for us. We probably in general practice would see, I would think, especially in the younger population, sometimes 30 to 40% of people coming in with lactose intolerance. They have issues consuming the sugar, lactose, which is found in cow's milk. And I have a lot of patients who will come and see me and they'll say, well, look, I tried cutting out the cheese, I tried cutting out the ice cream and the milk, but I don't think it made much difference. But they're missing out on the fact that a lot of processed foods have milk products added to them. And just before patients go wandering off at the age of 5 to see the gastroenterologist and have a scope put down the mouth, I pop them onto a very, very strict dairy-free, lactose-free diet, and they do remarkably well. They start being able to attend kinder. They start being able to become more social. It's wonderful to see kids who get better. It's the best part of my job when I see children who come in who've been unwell, and then the next day they come in and they're a lot better. And it's also great to hear from parents who will say, well, look, my child's now being lactose-free for the last 3 or 4 weeks. They're feeling so much better. Things are going well. So these foods aren't good for us. We don't want the dead animal flesh. We don't need that. We don't need that absolute awful material going through our digestive tract. The World Health Organization have recently said that, only a couple of years ago, that these foods are associated, processed foods are associated with bowel cancer. We've known that for a long time. It makes perfect sense. Your skin acts as a protective layer from the UV light that comes in from the sun. It can only take so much damage though. But thankfully that we have a very protective layer of skin, and we have other components in the skin such as melanin, which are designed to hopefully absorb and deal with the UV light. So therefore we can walk around in the sun, walk around in streets in the sunlight and not get burnt. But your bowel is the same. Your bowel is kind of functioning a bit like a window to the external environment. And as that toxic meat product comes through the bowel and just sits there, and the body has issues digesting it because there's no real fiber in these foods. So they don't move through the bowel, the large bowel, too quickly. They just sit there. It's like UV light hitting the bowel all the time. And of course, you get inflammatory processes occurring in the bowel, and of course, this can lead down the track to cancer. The science is there. Can I ask you please to head to, those of you who are interested, please head to Dr. John Mcdougall, Mcdougall, John Mcdougall, Google him. John Mcdougall is a internal medicine physician in the United States. For doctors here in Australia, that's a generalist, a general physician. He is a remarkable man who has devoted a large portion of his life to promoting this way of eating. He has a wonderful website. His YouTube channel has a flurry of wonderful videos available. I'd encourage a lot of people to go to that website and hear what he has to say. There's Neil Barnard of PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They have some fantastic informative sheets on their website. There's also T. Colin Campbell and Caldwell Esselstyn. And Caldwell Esselstyn has shown a regeneration of patients who have had cardiovascular disease, and he's been able to show that vessel diameter that leads to a heart attack that was very closed off has opened up again. He's showed that through angiography, that is, being able to put radioactive dye through these vessels and see them in a larger state than what they were. So I'm very happy to take any questions if anyone has any questions. If they'd like to ask me any questions about plant-based nutrition, and I can go from there. In the meantime, I'm very happy to still keep talking about this. One of the key things to please appreciate is that if you do go down this pathway, do talk to your doctor about this. Whilst they may not be too encouraging about you consuming a whole foods plant-based diet, they may also think, well, where are you going to get your calcium? Where are you going to get protein? You need to still speak to them, because you will do well. You will change for in such a short amount of time. You're going to do so well, and your doctors need to be aware of that, because if you are on medication, that may need to be adjusted, particularly if you are a type 2 diabetic and you are taking insulin. Insulin is there. Remember, the analogy I gave before is that your body has sugar running through the arteries. It can't really get into the cell anymore. It can't get into the window. But what happens is that it can't get into the bedroom. So the insulin is a bit like a bouncer, and the bouncer comes along and pushes it into the cell. But of course, we still get more and more damage in the actual cell because we don't change our eating habits. We're still eating the bad foods. And so you come back 6 months later and you see me, and I say, well, your sugars are still up. So therefore, we're going to have to give you a higher dose of insulin. We're going to have to get more and more stronger bouncers to push that sugar into the cell. This is the cycle that takes place, and it's fruitless, pardon the pun. It is fruitless literally, isn't it? Because people usually don't have enough fruit in their diet. But it's a waste of time. It's a waste of space. It's a waste of a life. We should be here for 100, 120 years having a really wonderful time. We should be enjoying everyone's company. We should be happy. And most importantly, we should be healthy. And we shouldn't have to worry so much about having to come knocking on my door once a week to get your medications adjusted and telling me that your bowels don't work and you're tired and all that kind of thing. I feel so sorry for a lot of people out there that have gone into that little Ferris wheel and it's just going around and around and around. And they're not getting what they really deserve. They're not being able to get out there and enjoy life as much as they should. I will repeat it again, and then I'll answer Robert's question. It is never, ever too late. Please don't ever think that it's too late for you to change. It starts tomorrow. You have the chance 3 times a day to change what's happening in your body. A patient I only saw yesterday who came and saw me, and I said to her, imagine you're boiling water on a stove, and 3 times a day you're turning up the heat on the gas, and it's really boiling, and then you slowly start to turn it off, and then it comes back up again at lunchtime, and then dinner, and eventually the steam's going to boil over. Well, that's what we're doing. We're doing that to every cell in our body. We're turning up the heat in the form of inflammation 3 times a day. But the great news is that from the first meal tomorrow, that what you can do is instead of turning the gas up, you're turning it down. And it stays down. It stays down at lunch. It stays down at dinner. It stays down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It stays down at 3 a.m. in the morning. Whenever you want to snack. But therefore, you're not actually turning up the gas. You're not actually promoting that inflammation. And so, of course, just like a boiling pot of water, that won't overboil. It will start to cool down. It will start to refresh. And obviously, we'll see an improvement in our health. Robert says, do plant-based fats contribute to diabetes? So, good question. The answer is no, they don't. Let me explain to you, first of all, what fats are. We believe that fats are bad. We all hear it on, social media and news and everywhere. This person's overweight, that person's too fat, da-da-da-da-da-da. Let's first of all understand what the macronutrient fat is. Fat is a combination of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and it's a combination of the way the arrangements of carbon and hydrogen are programmed together that makes them something, a fat molecule. Now, fats are very useful. They're very, very, very useful to the body. they are they form the membrane around every single cell. In other words, they form the brick walls of a bedroom. Okay, so just like your bricks in your bedroom, you'll have the bricks, you'll have concrete, you'll have mortar, and so forth. You want to get the ratio of all that correctly. So for example, when you're putting mortar on your bricks, you don't want to make it too dry, but you don't want to make it too wet. You want to get the ratio of the concrete to water correct. And that's like the ratio, what we call omega-3 to omega-6. So when you get that right ratio of the right number of omega-6 molecules and the right number of omega-3 molecules, what happens is you then get the right constituents to build a healthy cell wall. The cell wall is so important. The cell wall is just like any kind of wall on any shop front. It's used to advertise the cell. It's used to tell the rest of the body what's going on. What am I doing? What's my function? The fats that are in the cell wall are important as conduits for getting things in and out of the cell. So fats are important. Now, the most common fats that we think about are the omega-3 and omega-6. This is simply a way of describing that carbon-hydrogen arrangement I talked about before. All you have to really remember, as I do, is that omega-3 is 3 and omega-6 is 6. Okay, that's all I remember. I did a thesis on this around about, I'm thinking now, 15 years ago. And I remember I wrote about omega-3 and omega-6 to the tune of about 200 pages of a 400-page thesis. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but we are told that omega-3 is protective, and we're told that omega-6 is bad. What actually happens is that omega-6, when it's around the body, when it's in a large amount, it tends to set up that kind of defense system that I talked about at the start. It tends to sort of encourage inflammation. It tends to sort of upset the balance. It's a little bit like having a nervous friend. It's the nervous friend of the group. It's still a nice person and you still want to go out with them, but it's just a bit anxious. The omega-3 is really zen. They are really chilled and they complement the group really, really well. And when you've got mates like omega-3 and omega-6, you can't go wrong. The problem is that the current SAD diet, the standard American diet, standard Australian diet, the diets of the Western world and the middle class in China, that diet has an enormous amount of omega-6 and a very, very small amount of omega-3. And that ratio is not good. Like I talked about before, the ratio in terms of the mortar and the concrete and the water, if it's off, it doesn't work properly. The wall will collapse. Well, the same thing happens with your cells in your body. When that ratio is off and your cell wall is trying to incorporate omega-3 and omega-6, the ratio is not correct. We're giving it way more omega-6 than we have to with omega-3. Now, Robert's question was around about, do fats that are in plants cause diabetes? No, because plants have the ratio perfectly sorted out. The ratio is, the best ratio we know for good health is 4:1. That is 4 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. Now, it just so happens that all plant foods have that ratio. That ratio sets up just enough anxiety in the omega-6 with enough zen from the omega-3. It's wonderful, it's great, because there are circumstances when you do want your body to be a little bit inflammatory, to protect itself and look after itself when there's a bit of trauma and a bit of an issue, but then you want it to also have a cooling effect, okay? So that ratio is found in plants, whole food plants. What can also unfortunately be seen in animal products is saturated fat. We don't see saturated fat in the plant foods. Saturated fat is another way of describing that carbon-hydrogen arrangement, and saturated fat is really the gold bullion bar of all gold bullion bars. So if you've just joined me late, at the start I talked about the idea of energy density and why whole foods are much better than the animal products. So saturated fat is very high in energy, and the body will store that and absorb that straight into the cells, okay? It'll be used as a storage device. So cells get used as storage devices for their high energy content that is in saturated fat, because the body doesn't know that we're living in 2018. The body thinks that we could be in an ice age tomorrow, living on the tundra, where we may not have any food to eat for months. So it stores every single bit of energy it can as a safety mechanism. But we don't live like that anymore, okay? Not like that in the Western world, at least. So there's no saturated fat that's found in the plant foods. Therefore, the plant foods can't cause diabetes. The plant foods are full of fiber. They're full of water. They are full of the micronutrients, the calcium, magnesium, the zinc, the iron. Iron, we hear all about iron from meat. Iron is coming in from the ground. It's full of everything we need. And we fill up on these foods, and we feel fantastic on these foods because they're so enriched with so many great things in them. The last thing I'll say about plants, which is important to remember, I used the analogy before of skin and the way skin is defensive, is that think about what happens. Like, my favorite place on the planet is Queensland. I love Queensland. I'm going up there in a couple of weeks' time. The Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Cairns, beautiful. When I go up to Queensland, I can't be staying out in the sun for no more than 5-10 minutes, okay, without having to make sure I've got suntan cream on and I'm wearing a hat and slip, slop, slap, all that kind of thing. Because my skin can only put up with so much damage that's coming in from the sun. So my skin sits here, the UV light comes in and hits my skin. I've got the benefit. As soon as I start to feel heat on my hand, I can move my hand. I can cover it up. I can take it away from the sun. But the plants don't have that capacity. The plants that are sitting there 24 hours a day, they're just looking up at the sky. They've done nothing wrong, the poor little plants. And up comes the sun, and the sun beams down at them. Can you imagine if you're lying on the Gold Coast beach and the sun, that beautiful sunrise, the best sunrise in the world, rises up, and you're just lying there. You go, this is a great sunrise. But then you can't move. And then I guarantee you, within about half an hour, you're going to be burnt because that sun is hitting you the whole time. Plants can't move. So plants have remarkable protective capacity to deal with the UV light. That they not only use the UV light to actually create sugar and create storage sugar, and they put that down into the base of the plant, and that gets in a storage organ like a potato, for example. But they have a remarkable ability to reflect and actually to not allow that UV damage. So when you consume plants, you're actually taking in all those benefits, those massive amounts of antioxidants, those massive amounts of micronutrients that are within the plant that has been able to withstand the onslaught of UV light. We're ingesting that. We're ingesting that. And instead of the awful material that we're seeing in dairy washing over our cells, telling our cells to grow, telling our cells to multiply and multiply and multiply, we're in fact washing our cells over with antioxidants, all these cooling and calming foods, these calming aspects of the diet are allowing our cells to relax and our cells to repair. There's nothing remarkable about this process. As I've said before, you all know this process happens every single day because you all feel when you're getting a bit too warm in the sun and you cover yourself up. You've all felt before when you've sprained your ankle or you've fallen over and you've bruised yourself that you know within a couple of days, hopefully not too long, you get better. Your body can repair itself. There's no reason why every cell in your body can't repair itself, okay? So it's important that people understand that, yes, there is some genetic influence in a lot of the diseases that we see, particularly obesity. There is a large amount of genes in the human genome, the 100,000 genes that are in our genome, the instructions on how to build a human being, a large amount, almost the same amount that correspond to determining how high you are or tall, are also determining how you respond to energy, how you deal with hunger, how you deal with food, digestion, and so forth. However, not those genes are, as Neil Barnard says really beautifully, those genes are like committees. And yes, they have a voice, but they don't have to actually be the conclusion of the committee. So I, for example, sit on a few boards, and as a director, we all come to the board meeting with many different viewpoints, and we don't always, see eye to eye, but then you get an amalgamation of thoughts and you get the best outcome. Your genes are like that, particularly for diabetes and obesity. They will come to the meeting, they will say, well, this is what we should do, this is what we should do that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bad for you just because mum and dad had bad genes. So it's a key thing to understanding that whilst we are influenced slightly by our genetic makeup, it's our environment that is also another director that's also giving very good input. I'd want that. I'd want to have someone on my side who is advocating to make me live as long as possible and as happy and healthy and well as possible. And that can only be found in the plant-based foods. So check them out. Mads is asking, my stepfather is recovering from a heart attack. How do I convince a 70-year-old man who is set in his ways to try a vegan diet? I said to someone the other day, and she didn't like it, I said, I tend to use emotional blackmail on my patients. Doesn't make me a very good doctor, apparently. But I do it for a reason, because tomorrow, Mads' stepdad, we want him to be able to turn down that gas stove. And I said to the patient I talked about at the start, the 80-year-old man who lost his weight, lost all that weight, went off all his tablets. I actually used his granddaughter as leverage, in the sense that he didn't come in that day to actually see me. He brought his granddaughter in because she had a viral sore throat. And we were talking, and he said, look, while you're with me, can you print out my medications? And when I saw all those common medications, I said to him, and I was quite frank, I said, do you want to be around for her wedding? Do you want to be around to see her grow up? Because with these kind of medications that you are on, the chances are you are going to have some kind of major cardiac event within the next couple of years. And it took him a little bit back because he felt he was doing the right thing. He was taking his medication in the morning, injecting his insulin, and doing everything he had to do. And I used that idea that I wanted him to give this a whirl because I want him to be around for her wedding. And again, I used that as a stepping stone to him then getting into good health, and then we use the good health to go forward. He wouldn't have it any other way afterwards. Within the first 2 or 3 weeks, he started coming back to see me. He felt so fantastic that it didn't matter whatever I had to say to him then, he was already hooked. So I ask you, with family and friends who are maybe in that Ferris wheel, they're in that merry-go-round, do plead with them just to try it for 1 or 2 weeks. Just plead with them to try it for 1 or 2 weeks, because the chances are that once they feel so well, they won't want to go back to the old way. They won't want to go back to eating these products. Another aspect you can use to talk to people about this is the social and environmental impact that this has. I believe we use something like 80% of the grain that's produced is often used for livestock, and 20% is used for population. We have enough material out there to feed ourselves, but we are clearing so much land and we're doing so much damage to the environment. It need not be this way. And I do hear people who will come and see me and they will say, look, I've gone vegan, not for health, but I've gone vegan for the environment. The economy is another aspect. When I first went vegan, I would go to the shops and start buying foods like this. What I was noticing is that I would have a trolley full of food, and I'm watching the screen and expecting the total to be somewhere up about $150, but then it would turn out to be $65. And I think, why is it like that? And the reality is because I was buying fruits and vegetables, I was buying large bulks of vegetables and fresh produce, and it's not expensive. When you go and buy bottles of milk and you buy meat products and chicken products and all these packaged foods, they're very condensed and they're quite expensive. So you end up saving money as well. Do we have any more questions? Does anyone want to ask any brief questions? I'll just close by repeating what I said before. Please check out my website, livinglongertoday.com, and check out Dr. John Mcdougall, his website. Another wonderful person who, please, I want you to go and watch some videos of him, is Dr. Michael Klaper, Klaper. Michael is a family physician in the United States. He works in California at a place called True North. He recently has left there to pursue his full-time passion of education, and particularly to medical students on this very topic of whole foods, plant-based nutrition. Michael is a beautiful, beautiful human being. Michael is a wonderful guy, and I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times, and his whole passion and thirst for a happy, healthy life is infectious. And I do ask you to please watch his videos and his YouTube talks, because he will influence you in a good way. Sometimes it's worth also using those videos to help convince loved ones as well. If we don't have any more questions, I will just close by mentioning one other person, and that is Andrew Taylor. Some of you may or may not know Andrew. If you're in Australia, you probably will. So Andrew Taylor is a very good friend of mine, and Andrew changed his life a couple of years ago when in 2016 he ate nothing but potatoes for the entire year. And Andrew lost a massive amount of weight. He regained a sense of confidence like never before. He was able to showcase for the very first time that just one single food group and food product, potato, provided everything he needed. He had blood tests along the way that were under the care of a GP, and everything was really fantastic in Andrew's case. So Andrew Taylor is someone else who people may wish to have a look at, because I can sit here and talk about the science and the medicine all day, but Andrew is a fair dinkum Aussie bloke who came from a background of not knowing the science, not knowing the evidence, and he did a bit of research. He started to eat this way, and he did so well. And the best thing I think I use as I guess a bit of a flag for some people is I ask people to watch Andrew's very first video, and what you see is this man who is about to walk up Mount Everest, in the sense that he doesn't look healthy. He looks scared. He looks terrified. He is someone who is not sure of what the next 12 months are going to hold. And then you watch his final video on January 1st, 2017, when he celebrated the end of the potato diet for the year. And he's a changed man. And if someone can change their life in 1 year, just 1 year, if that's what they can do, then every single other person should use that as inspiration. It's never too late, and it doesn't matter how dark your world is or how dark your life is. We think back to where we were a year ago. If Andrew can change his life around for the better just through health, imagine what you can do in all other aspects of your life. You never give up. You never give up. We're all entitled to, hopefully, a long life here. Should be happy. And in our book of our life, there may be a few chapters which are going to be rough, which are going to be dark, but not all chapters have to be that way. And sometimes you just got to keep turning the pages, and eventually you'll get to the next chapter, and you know that whilst it may have been a bit dark on these pages, it'll be a bit better in the next few. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll leave it open for about 30 more seconds if anyone else has any other burning questions to ask me. Sorry, now that I recall, someone sent me a message before about renal failure and plant-based diets. Look, when it comes to the kidneys are made up of very, very, very small amounts, small vessels. And when I talked before about cardiovascular disease, generally the most common cause of renal disease, or the ability of the kidneys to filter your blood, and the most prominent reason why they start to regress is because of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. The second one is because of high blood pressure. And so we typically like to control these if we can. And I can't talk much more about your particular case, but I do encourage you to stand true with a plant-based diet, especially with nephrotic syndrome. It's not going to worsen nephrotic syndrome. And nephrotic syndrome, for those who are interested, is where the kidneys unfortunately have a few little breaks in their filters, just like a sponge in your kitchen sink. has a few tears, and there's a bit of protein that's escaping more so into the urine than we would like. But I do ask that person to Google a guy called Walter Kempner, Kempner, I think, Kempner. Walter Kempner showed, by memory, back in the 40s, he showed patients with nephrotic syndrome, profound nephrotic syndrome. These were very overweight individuals with a lot of fluid on board. He put them on the rice diet, by memory, and they revitalized their health beautifully. So I wish you all the best. And I do hope that you will consider going on a whole foods plant-based diet. You have nothing to lose. You only have the benefit of turning down that inflammatory cascade, because we all want to see you around here to the age of 100. We want you to be happy. We want you to be here for your kids and your grandkids, and you deserve it. You don't deserve to be knocking on my door every single week requiring scripts for medication and telling me that, you need referrals to see specialists and so forth. We want you to be happy and healthy, and all the best to you. Take care.